Growing up in a child care facility after my parents died in an accident, I didn't see any meaning in living or working hard. One day, I received a letter from my mom, who was supposed to be dead. Moreover, it was addressed to the house where I lived with my parents. This couldn't be happening. But maybe. After days of thinking about it, I decided to go to the address on the letter. However, standing in front of the house full of memories, I suddenly got cold feet. So, I decided to peek from the backyard. There, I saw a middle-aged couple living. I observed more closely. I was thinking if they were strangers, I would sneak back. But the next moment, I doubted my eyes. My dad, Mom. I stood there in an unexpected turn of events. My name is Ashley Thompson. I entered a child care facility at the age of 10 and graduated from it 2 years ago. Now, I juggle multiple part-time jobs while living alone in a cheap apartment in New York. My parents died in a traffic accident when I was 10. It was a pile-up on the freeway during the summer holidays. I was in the car too, but miraculously survived because I was sitting in the back seat. However, my parents, who were in the driver's and passenger's seats, died on impact when they crashed into a truck in front of them. It was my birthday celebration on the way back from visiting the leisure pool that I had always wanted to visit. I was dozing off when suddenly a cannon-like shock hit me, and the next moment, I couldn't move. With no sense of time, I desperately called for my parents. But there was no answer from them, and I lost consciousness, waking up later in a hospital bed. As the nurse realized I was awake, she hurried around, and soon, police officers and doctors started coming into my room. All the while, I kept wondering when my parents would come. I asked the nurse several times, where are Dad and Mom, but got only vague answers. At the age of 10, I thought, they must be hospitalized in another hospital. A few days later, I learned the meaning of those vague answers. A woman, claiming to be my aunt, told me my parents' injuries were fatal, and there was no hope for survival. She also mentioned she had her own family and couldn't take me in. I couldn't understand the situation at all. She explained the situation simply enough for me to understand. As a result, I learned that once I was discharged, I would be going to a child care facility. I had many questions about what would happen to our house, my school, etc., but the thought of becoming part of a stranger's family was so unwelcome that I felt slightly relieved. My injuries healed, and I was sent to the child care facility without returning home. As my aunt had taken care of the funeral and sorting through our belongings, sending my things to the facility, we had been in touch through letters with her, so I was informed about these arrangements in advance. To be honest, the thought of strangers rummaging through our house felt awful, but there was nothing 10-year-old me could do about it. The idea that I would never return home had never crossed my mind. I wanted to know why, but I didn't know whom to ask or how to express it. Everything progressed without my consent, and I just went along with it, day by day. Even after entering the child care facility, I would receive letters from my mom's sister a few times a year, but the content was always the same.
Are you doing okay? Do you need any help?
At first, I replied to her, but soon I ran out of things to say. So, gradually, I stopped responding to the letters. Since I had never met my mom's sister while my parents were alive, she was like a stranger to me. Being worried about by a stranger felt meaningless, and exchanging letters felt like a chore. Perhaps she sensed my feelings because the letters from my mother's sister became fewer each year. By the time I graduated from the child care facility, I had almost forgotten the letters existed, becoming distant. I always felt left behind in an unknown world, spending my days in the child care facility. Maybe because I never returned home after the funeral during my hospital stay, reality never fully set in. Why am I here? A sense of alienation always followed me. As I grew older, this alienation turned into loneliness within me. I have nothing left. There's no point in trying if there's nothing. That's how I came to despise everything and lost my motivation. So, after graduating high school and leaving the facility to get a job, I couldn't fit in with the gap between me and others or the workplace atmosphere, and I quit the job soon after. I became a part-time worker, but I never felt at home in any job, and they never lasted long. I've been unemployed for a long time, and my savings run out pretty quickly. I was barely scraping by with day jobs, living on the edge every day. Is there really a point in living through such loneliness? Wouldn't it be easier to just leave my apartment and live on the streets? I thought about it many times, but always stopped myself at the last moment. My parents would surely be sad if they knew I was living on the streets. Even though I knew I could never see them again, I didn't want to do anything that would make them sad. On a particularly exhausting day, I received a call from the child care facility saying there was a letter for me. Perhaps because of the guilt from quitting my job shortly after starting, I tried to avoid any contact with the child care facility. So, I intended to have them throw away the letter without receiving it. However, as soon as I heard the sender of the letter, I was shocked as if I had been hit on the head with a hammer. The sender of the letter was my mom, who was supposed to have died in an accident when I was 10 years old. I immediately went to the child care facility to get the letter. From the moment I received the call, my mind was in chaos. My parents were supposed to have died in an accident when I was 10. That was an unchangeable fact. So, miracles don't happen, and the letter must surely be some mistake. I tried hard not to escape from reality, calming myself down. Yet, against my feelings, the impossible hope that the accident death was a mistake kept emerging in my mind. If my mom was alive, why did she leave me in the facility for so many years? What would sending the letter now change? As I was shaken by the train to the child care facility, I continued to ponder many things. However, I couldn't find a satisfying answer or sort out my feelings until the end. Instead, my mind became a mess of confusion, joy, doubt, anger, and sadness, and I felt like I could cry at any moment. When I arrived at the child care facility after more than an hour, my head was blank from overthinking. Let's just see the thing first and then think, I muttered to myself before entering the facility. Receiving the letter in the office, I stared intensely at the handwriting on the envelope. It was unmistakably my deceased mom's handwriting, and the sender was indeed my mom. Hesitantly opening the envelope, inside were 3 letters with illustrations of a character I liked when I was 10. At the beginning of the first letter, it read, "To Ashley, now 20 years old." Just looking at the letters, filled with my mom's soft and slightly quirky handwriting, made my chest tight and tears come to my eyes. The letter, filled with memories from my birth until I turned 10, and imaginations of how I would grow and spend the next 10 years, was just like my mother herself. I looked up at the ceiling several times to avoid wetting the letter with my tears. Still, I couldn't stop the tears from flowing, leaving stains in several places. After finishing the letter, I thanked the staff at the facility and quickly left the place because my mind was still confused and I wasn't ready to talk to anyone. Riding back on the train, I read the letter over and over, feeling as if I could grasp something by doing so. As a result, I concluded that the letter must have been written before the accident. My mom wrote this for my 10th birthday. The age of 10 was probably a big break for my mom. Probably, my mom wrote this letter as a commemoration of me turning 10 and filled it with hopes and thoughts for my future 10 years later. The question was, who sent it? The first person that came to mind was my mom's sister. However, it had been years since we became estranged, and I couldn't understand the reason for her to send a letter in my mom's name. Besides, the written address was the house where I lived when I was 10. If it were indeed my mom's sister, she would have used her name and her own address. Since we are so estranged from each other that I have forgotten, she won't remember me. I couldn't think of anyone else who might be behind this. The image of my mom in the letter filled me with happiness and confusion. What was the right way to feel? What should I do after reading this? No matter how much I thought, I couldn't find an answer. Tired of thinking, I decided to put the letter away in a drawer as if nothing happened, and return to my usual daily life. However, as days passed, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. I thought about throwing it away, but every time I saw my mom's handwriting on the envelope, I knew I couldn't do it. So, I decided to go meet the sender of the letter. Having nothing in the first place, I had nothing more to lose. Plus, maybe I could ask the sender for help with my life. I might have consciously been expecting something from the sender to change my current life. As I took the train towards the familiar address, I gazed out at the streets, completely different from my memories. Places that were once just vacant lands and forests were now filled with a big shopping center and many houses. The station I got off at had a completed bus terminal and even a stylish cafe. This too is a world unknown to me, I thought as I trudged towards the address in the letter. However, a few minutes later, as I turned a corner, the scene that unfolded before me took my breath away. It was a residential area almost unchanged from my memories, from 10 years ago. That scenery instantly pulled me back from a colorless, blurry world into the vivid world of 10 years ago. This was undoubtedly the town where I lived. And ahead, there was our family's house. Before I knew it, I found myself running towards the house. I was filled with a strange sense of reassurance, like a school child returning home or a child who had been lost for a long time. At the end of my frantic run, there was my beloved home, just as it was in my memories. The letter had indeed been sent from my home. But when I come to the front of the house, I didn't have the courage to press the doorbell. The fear of the unknown outweighed my desire to uncover the truth, keeping my feet planted. After pondering what to do, I decided to observe a little more and went around to the backyard. I looked softly into the garden, somewhat uncomfortable with the thieving behavior. Peeking into the garden, I saw a middle-aged couple preparing for sunbathing on the balcony. The man seemed to be in a wheelchair. To check if they were acquaintances, I continued to observe. As I heard their calm voices, their faces turned briefly in my direction. The moment I saw their faces, I inadvertently exclaimed, "Ha, Dad, Mom, this can't be real. I stood frozen in shock, and then the man in the wheelchair noticed me.
Are you Ashley? Is that Ashley?
He muttered my name, then suddenly started crying out loud. Meanwhile, I was so overwhelmed by the shocking turn of events that I couldn't move. The next moment, a woman who had been inside the house sensed something was wrong and rushed out to the balcony. She ran straight to the wheelchair and spoke to the man. Through his sobs, he pointed at me and said something to her. The woman looked at me intently, then suddenly smiled and said, "You're Ashley, aren't you? We have something we'd like to talk to you about. Could you please come in?" She invited me into the house. Although I was still trying to grasp the situation, I had many questions of my own. I nodded silently and was led through the front door into the living room. The woman introduced herself as Patricia, and the man in the wheelchair was indeed my dad, Stephen. They were married and now lived in the house as a couple. Patricia told me that my father was in a coma and critical condition after the accident, wandering between life and death. I was supposed to have been informed about this when I was 10, but I had no memory of it. When I told Patricia this, she asked, "How were you told?" And I shared that my aunt, my mom's sister, had said his condition was hopeless. However, upon reflection, I remembered being told only about my mom's death. If that was the case, why was my father considered dead? Patricia and I spent hours reconciling my memories with the truth. As a result, I realized I had made a huge mistake. As a 10-year-old who couldn't grasp that my father was in a coma, I felt a unilateral rejection towards him for never coming to see me. Dad never comes to see me. Maybe he's mad. I'm sure she's dead because I said I wanted to go to the leisure pool, I thought, feeling rejected by my father. This eventually morphed into the memory of both my parents dying in the accident.
This is just my guess, but maybe it was less painful for Ashley back then to think both had died than to feel rejected by your dad.
Patricia suggested, trying to console me, but I was filled with remorse towards my dad. Yet, I was also puzzled. I was terrified to ask, but I knew I'd regret it if I didn't. I gathered my courage and asked Patricia, "Why didn't my dad come for me?" Patricia glanced at my dad. My dad nodded silently, and Patricia told me what was going on.
Stephen regained consciousness more than half a year after the accident.
Half a year. That coincided with the time I was discharged from the hospital.
Even though it was miraculous that he woke up, it took him several more months to comprehend his situation, waking up feeling like it was just one night's sleep, only to find out half a year had passed. It's understandable.
Moreover, my dad was left with many disabilities, including issues with memory, speech, and physical functions. Doctors had said returning to his previous life was impossible. Given the bleak outlook, my aunt proceeded with the plan to place me in a child care facility.
By the time I woke up, everything was gone. I was painfully aware of the time I had lost and its importance.
My dad said, tears brimming in his eyes. Patricia told me that after being discharged, my dad was admitted to the disability facility where she worked.
Even though he wanted to see you, there was a time he couldn't express it because he struggled with words. At the same time, he began to accept that Lisa had passed away. Stephen fell into a deep depression and was even admitted to a psychiatric ward.
My dad, too, had been searching for a reason to live in his despair, just like me. Hearing this, I felt incredibly relieved. My dad hadn't rejected or forgotten about me. Instead, he had been thinking of me so much that it made him sick. Feeling this, the cold loneliness that had taken up residence in my heart began to melt away, replaced by a strange warmth. Even after returning from the psychiatric ward to the facility, my dad's emotional state remained unstable. He refused rehabilitation, didn't eat, and had trouble communicating, leading to problematic behavior like lashing out at staff or throwing objects. The staff's approach to my dad gradually became more bureaucratic. In the facility, where he was treated like an untouchable, Patricia was the one who faced him without a grimace. She used homemade cards and a whiteboard to understand what he wanted to communicate. She also massaged him daily to prevent his muscles from stiffening and made time for conversation practice by visiting him. My dad said, "I saw my Lisa's image in her. Thinking that Lisa would be sad seeing me in such a disheveled state, I felt I had no choice but to try harder," and tightly held Patricia's hand. It was evident how important Patricia had become to my dad. I felt a bit envious of their relationship. I wished I had someone to support me like that. Afterwards, my dad underwent rehabilitation every day like he was reborn, stopping all aggressive behaviors toward the staff. The dad who wouldn't even try to get out of bed at the beginning was now going to the rehab room on his own and voluntarily training. Just hearing about it felt like a miracle. But the real miracle was yet to come. Thanks to his desperate rehab efforts, my dad recovered enough to live a normal life. He was able to leave the disability facility.
The doctors were amazed, saying they've never seen someone recover like me.
My dad said with a hint of pride. Beside him, Patricia also smiled happily. Her smile, so much like my deceased mom's, wrapped my heart in a strange nostalgia and warmth. Speaking of the letter, I hadn't asked about it yet. I took out my mom's letter from my bag and inquired about who sent it. Suddenly, my dad looked down and fell silent. Seeing this, Patricia explained on behalf of my dad. After we got married, while cleaning the room, I accidentally found this letter. Stephen always thought of Ashley but felt he didn't have the right to meet her, avoiding it. I convinced him that we should at least send the letter. With Patricia's explanation, the messy pieces in my head finally came together. It was all a twist of fate. My dad couldn't come to see me due to an accident and disability. I thought my dad was dead. Both of us felt alone, walking through a dimly lit life. Yet, Patricia and the letter left by my mom brought us together.
I never forgot about Ashley, but I felt so guilty for not doing anything for so long, fearing that contacting you now would be a bother. I'm truly sorry.
My dad said that and apologized to me. Hearing about his struggles and turmoil, I felt no blame towards him. Instead, I realized that he had been thinking of me for a long time, and I was honestly happy. The fact that we both reached a point of desperation at the same time made me feel the weird connection of being parent and child, almost making me laugh. Sharing this with Patricia and my dad, both shed tears of laughter. It was the first time I saw such warm tears. Looking out the window, the sunset was casting its light on the balcony. I said, "I think it's time for me to go," and stood up. My dad's voice stopped me in a panic.
Wait, now that we've finally met, I don't want to leave Ashley alone again. I might not have the right to say this now, but I want us to be a family again. Stay here, Ashley.
My dad pleaded, tears different from before streaming down his face. I was touched by how much he cared, yet I couldn't shake the fear of disrupting the happiness he had with Patricia. The two feelings of refusing and wanting to live like this with my dad clash, and I'm stuck. I found myself unable to move.
Ashley, if I were your mom, do you think you'd refuse?
What? I was taken aback by the sudden question and stared at Patricia. Patricia smiled softly, as if she could see through my lost heart. Her smile, her generous and gentle consideration, was just like my mom's. It felt as if my real mom was encouraging me. And I had the courage to be honest about my feelings. If you're okay with someone like me, please let me be a part of your family. I answered loudly, and my dad lifted his head so quickly, I thought he might tumble out of his wheelchair in his excitement. Seeing him like that, I laughed out loud for the first time in 10 years. I had finally found my way back to a world where I belonged. Since then, 6 months have passed. I'm currently studying hospitality vigorously to fulfill my dream of becoming a flight attendant. Moreover, I plan to take entrance exams for a specialized school next year. Before coming back here, I had no motivation to do anything, let alone think about my dreams or future. However, reuniting with my dad and having the space to think about my future, my mom's letter once again guided me. At the end of that letter, it read, "What are you doing now? Have you become a flight attendant like you dreamed? No matter the future, Mom is always cheering for Ashley." With my kind mom's thoughts in my heart, I decided to push forward towards my dream. And someday, I secretly plan to repay my dad and Patricia with my first paycheck.